Hello, I'm Hugh Coakley from the Guildford Dragon News. The Dragon are conducting a series of interviews with the leaders or nominated representatives of the various parties at Guildford Borough in the lead up to the local elections on May the 4th. And today we've got the great pleasure to have Sam Peters from the Green Party with us, and he has kindly agreed to be interviewed. Welcome, Sam, and thanks for talking to the Guildford Dragon News.
Thank you.
Sam, first question. The local plan was a huge issue at the last election. Is it such a big issue now? And what's your party's policy on the local plan?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard a lot of back and forth on the local plan recently. I think, regardless of anyone's view about the current administration, it's important to note they were somewhat saddled with a deeply flawed local plan that was pushed through at the last minute by the Conservatives after they realised they'd lose the council. It's due a formal review in the next year in any case. So our position is that it's better to work on the underlying assumptions and aims up to that point where it comes up due for review. To put it simply, the Green Party position is that the local plan has to work for local people. In terms of what needs changing, the most important thing is absolutely to review the housing need, which is based on flawed assumptions and calculations. That underpins the whole plan. So without an accurate picture of what housing we need and what we can take, we can't begin to have a reasonable discussion over what that looks like. And in terms of any changes we'd like to see, we're looking for key changes to several key changes to planning generally. And as most Green Party policy does, we'd make sure this is done in a joined up way with other related issues. For example, the need for social housing, for homes to be properly insulated and built to be as sustainable as possible, accessible public transport links and walking and cycling options rather than in the middle of nowhere with no facilities, and often overlooked things like developers not being allowed to simply hook up drainage systems to the closest sewer pipe and overload treatment plants and cause more sewage overflows. I think this kind of joined up thinking across different policy areas is something we're really lacking. And so, for example, the ones I've listed above, not only do they help tackle climate change and air pollution and give us the homes that we actually want and need, but it also makes sure that energy bills are as low as possible, that people have genuine options in terms of accessing local needs without relying on cars, and that we don't see more people falling into fuel poverty or having to choose whether to heat or eat.
How can the local plan do that? That's very broad. Is that not quite high level? How can the local plan help on fuel poverty, for instance?
I mean, there are sort of very direct interventions that you can do. I've been part of a project called Leaky Homes, where we have gone to people's homes and with thermal cameras looked at their homes and told them, your heat's leaking most from here, or you could fix this, you can apply for this funding. But in terms of the local plan, planning more generally needs to have these elements in, so we're not having to retrofit and to go back to these poorly built homes, poorly designed, put in the wrong places. We need to be getting it right first time. And for example, in Waverley, where we have a lot of Green Party councillors helping run the council and the portfolio holder on the environment, they've seen some huge leaps forward there. They've built some of the first passive house standard social housing in the country. They've made it much harder for developers to dodge the requirements for affordable housing. Essentially, they're making.
How have they done that?
How
have they done that? How have they sort of closed the loophole on affordable housing with developers?
Well, I mean, developers will claim that they can't build essentially because it doesn't. They don't have enough profit there to be able to build this affordable housing. There are issues with the sort of definition of affordable generally. It's taken to mean 80% of market rate, which obviously for many people is completely unaffordable anyway. But you can. It's within the council's remit to deny developers when they sort of say, well, we can't build 40% affordable housing. It's going to have to be 20 or 10 or nothing. And I'd like to see that kind of sort of a stronger response from the council when we have situations like that here as well as over in Waverley.
My understanding is that the councils are hamstrung in so much as the law allows them to do a viability assessment, and if they're not making sufficient profit, how that's defined, I don't know. But if they're not making sufficient profit, that's a loophole they can just sort of slip through.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have to manoeuvre within the boundaries of how the law is currently laid out. But there is also room for pushback on that, where developers are clearly, occasionally at times it has to be said that maybe it's dubious, let's say, that you can't make a profit on building however many houses and selling them at UK market rates without providing any affordable homes.
Okay, so next theme, Sam, is that there's a project within Guildford Borough Council called Shaping Guildford's Future, including the master plan. Would the Green Party encourage continuing work on the master plan?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, it certainly talks the talk. It ticks most of the right boxes when it comes to things like sustainability, accessibility, the focus on residents. It's all the usual elements we expect to see in any sort of flashy video about development, really. Obviously, it'll have to take into account changes to North Street and to the development at the old Debenhams, and also the need for local people to feel that their views have been fully listened to and taken on board in the wake of the recent focus that we've seen on planning. And as with any sort of flashy website or video, we need to have clear boundaries in place so that details don't get lost to time overruns, cost overruns, and we end up with a fragmented end product that doesn't provide the benefits.
You sound very suspicious. You sound as if we're being sold a contract.
Oh, no, not at all. Well, I mean, yeah, that's not the intention. It's having worked or having volunteered on a local planning scrutiny group and seen sort of the stages of development as the application goes in and gets some pushback, and then things get cut off or watered down. It's just important to not necessarily have a set of red lines, but to make sure that the plan as sold and as put forward to local people is one that most of us can agree with, and one that can be stuck to, because otherwise the trust in the planning departments and the developers is gone, and then you're sort of you're left open to the kind of discussions we've had over planning in the last couple of weeks or couple of months.
Okay, so how many candidates are the Green Party fielding in Guildford Borough?
In Guildford Borough, we have 3 candidates. With the Guildford and Waverley Green Party, we've got 19 across that whole across Guildford and Waverley.
Okay, so with 3, if you were to have success in the 3 in Guildford, what sort of is that a big enough group to make a difference to the council?
It's made all the difference in Waverley. There's 2 on Waverley Borough Council, and yet Steve Williams is the environment portfolio holder. They're working with the Lib Dems and other parties to run that council. So it really can. We always say even 1 green in the room can make a big difference. And we've seen how much of a difference that 2 can make on Waverley, or 4 on Godalming Town Council, where they're the second largest group. So 3 could definitely make a big difference in Guildford. Okay,
fantastic. Next theme, Sam. There has been, I'm sure you're aware of the video that went viral, the Robin Horsley video, The Battle for Guildford. What's your party's view of that?
Yeah, well, it's certainly got people talking anyway. I'd say first thing to mention, the framing of it as a concerned resident making his feelings known is a bit disingenuous, obviously, given that Mr. Horsley's a former parliamentary candidate and Brexit campaigner, so it's not coming from a politically neutral.
He was an independent.
Yes. Yeah.
So would that not be politically neutral, or am I?
Well, I mean, I felt that it skirted that a little bit and made out that it was, just residents talking on behalf of other residents, when there is, I think, a somewhat of a political agenda behind it. How far you want to go with that is up for debate, I think.
Okay.
But, I mean, the best way to stop planning becoming this purely political weapon in Guildford, like we've seen recently, is to make sure the public feel adequately consulted on developments that will affect them where they live, and in particular developments in town centres, which affect everyone. No matter whether you live directly there or not, you're going to be using your local town centres, and these are things that people are going to have to live with for generations. So we need to make sure we get them right.
Okay. He spoke about height policies, and he spoke about I think it was I believe a lack of consultation over North Street, I believe. Well, I don't believe, I know. What's your thoughts? Is he
So
right?
we've had
Is he right?
there's been a lot of talk about height limits, sort of a set concrete height limit, pardon the pun. It sounds appealing, but in practice, it means that if you set a hard limit, that's where developers come in immediately. So I think the best thing ultimately is to take each application on its own merits, especially in Guildford, where the natural height profile varies so much. And yeah, as mentioned, as part of this local planning scrutiny group, I found it particularly important to not just point out the flaws in a plan, but also note the things that developers have done right. For example, whether it's good natural lighting and ventilation, proper bike storage, because that can make just as much of an impact as a negative comment, and that can ultimately shape the kind of things that they are coming to the drawing board with, both on that development and in future as well.
Okay. So you wouldn't specifically have a height policy; it'd be a case for case basis.
Yeah, any
how would North Street
encourages
how would North
race
Street
top.
how would North Street have fitted into that?
It's tough to say. You've got to weigh it up with all the other issues involved in that particular plan, whether the housing it would have provided is actually needed, whether it's providing good use for the public generally, not just the residents who are going to be in that building. I mean, there's been a lot of back and forth on what the actual height would have been, and the comparisons with the nearby buildings. Sort of the more, sort of the 13-story plans. Yeah, I mean, that does sound on the face of it pretty enormous. But then we've got the development going on at the station currently, that's going to provide a sort of a counterpiece to that. We'll have to, as I said, case by case basis is the way to go with it. But I think most people are agreed that Guildford doesn't really want the obvious sort of tower blocks that Woking has, for example.
Yeah, indeed. I think. Yeah. Okay. Another theme: Guildford Borough Council's finances are very tight at the present. Not helped by not getting fully reimbursed for the COVID expenses. What do you think? What would you do? What should GBC do to increase revenue given the state of the finances?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the COVID shortfall. That's £4 billion, I think, for local councils around the country. And another thing to note is that government funding of councils has been cut by 60% on average in the last decade, and these cuts have been focused mainly on councils not led by Conservatives. And obviously, that's an extremely quick way to increase local council budgets, but it's unlikely to happen for at least another year. And on the other hand, there have been complaints about Guildford Borough Council having to return unspent funding, both in this administration and the previous one, although it's not quite as simple as has been claimed by some of the parties involved in that particular squabble. So in light of that, I think we need to look at what councils, many councils are currently doing, whether that's sustainable long term. Things like outsourcing, shorter term spending, parking prices, property investments, and sharing services. Those are sort of the key five I'd like to mention. Outsourcing and shorter term spending essentially just kick the can down the road. They keep this year's budget lower. Ultimately, they cost us more, and they usually end up providing worse service too. I mean, we've only got Surrey County Council's recent overspend of £120 million on private special educational needs placements to look at there, where they, rather than providing these services in-house, they ended up needing £100 million bailout. Or a good example that everyone can relate to is a road that needs repairing every year, when really we could just do the job properly once and save that money, and also the delays, the aggravation, the air pollution, and so much more than that.
So how would how would that affect Guildford? Surrey do the roads, and Guildford, what sort of things would you want Guildford Borough to focus on?
So yeah, with Guildford, we've got the service sharing proposal coming up. I mean, it's a shame that it's come to that point, but ultimately it will save nearly £1 million a year, so we're told. And I'm pleased that there have been assurances on jobs and discussions with unions, and we'll have to make sure that's kept to throughout the process. Yeah, property investments. Sorry, we only need to look at Woking to see what a risk that can be. Nearly over £2 billion in debt now. I've also heard it suggested that vital council services be provided by volunteers, for example, answering the phones. But yeah, I mean, not to knock volunteers or volunteering. You know, I volunteer with Zero, with local food aid groups. It's a vital lifeline, but we can't be running council services with volunteers. So yeah, it's a complex issue. I would say, my point of view, we need to stop the short-termism, stop kicking the can down the road, and start thinking in a more joined-up way, saving money in the long run by doing things properly the first time around, and investing in the services and the innovative ideas like car-free days that bring people into Guildford in a sustainable way, and that rebuild that backbone of our local area in a way that puts residents first, and ideally that doesn't put anyone out of money, you know, even short term.
Okay. There are some that say that Guildford Borough Council is not doing enough to prioritise measures to address climate change. Do you agree?
I mean, there are efforts, but I do tend to agree on that. Yeah. If we look at the borough's climate action plan, it was recently ranked 5th. Waverley's was recently ranked 5th in the whole country. Guildford's came in at 88th. And where Waverley are taking the lead on walking and cycling infrastructure, for example, the Guildford Godalming Greenway, you know, Guildford, I think, falling behind a bit in their thinking on climate and environment.
Why? Why have we fallen behind?
Well, I think it's not for lack of trying on behalf of some of the councillors. It's there's a funding issue, but I think also that there's just a lack of a real knowledge and a real willingness to put forward ideas from Guildford, where Waverley, with the Greens leading the environment portfolio, are pushing ahead. For example, they built some of the first passive house standard social housing in the country. There's been a huge reduction in pesticide use, support for rewilding, the cycle and walking infrastructure, as I mentioned.
Why aren't we doing that? Is it something? Is it a political problem? Is it a money problem? Is it a you know, topographical? I don't know. Why is it?
I think, I mean, it partly is a money problem. I mean, all of these things take a certain amount of money. There is funding out there available that Waverley has been very good in taking up. I think Guildford could definitely be doing better in that regard. But yeah, as I said, I think it's the willingness to put forward these ideas and to be initially attacked for them. And then, they happen and suddenly people realize that they can cycle or walk to the shops and they don't have to drive and sit in a queue for 15 minutes. And once that momentum starts, then it's much easier to keep going from that point onward.
Okay. It's an important aspect of a council's work, the planning application side, to determining that. And there's been lots of complaints about slow response to the applications, and people say they can't get through on the phones. Hugely frustrating. How would you improve customer services at GBC?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that it can take forever to get through to the council by phone or by email. I have had a good experience recently, reporting that the lights in the underpass on York Road, Woodbridge Road roundabout had gone down, and they were fixed within, I think, a day and a half, 2 days. But generally speaking, it's taking forever to get through the services. I think we'll need to see what impact the service sharing would have. It's hard to tell before the plans are released for that. But yeah, it clearly shouldn't take hours or calls over multiple days to get through to your council services. And on planning, it would be good to see some figures on the relative numbers of planning officers to sort of be able to contextualize the reports. For example, in the Dragon, that Guildford had some of the worst record for processing planning applications. But we have to avoid overcompensating and waving through inappropriate development or loosening standards. I think actually having these higher standards for developers, making sure that they know they can't bring concessions out of the council so easily by delaying or redoing profitability sums, will actually speed things up a little bit. And yeah, with this sort of a better enforced set of standards for the big developers, we could provide a better, more sustainable, more suitable development where it's actually needed, and hopefully start clearing this backlog too.
Excuse me. Sam, thank you very much for talking to the Guildford Dragon News. And obviously good luck with your campaigning, good luck to all the candidates. Thank you for standing.
Thanks.
Okay. Much obliged. Bye-bye.